I'm now pleased to introduce our next session, which is the New World of Work and Unretirement. This will be a lively conversation between myself and good friends and colleagues, Rich Eisenberg and Kerry Hannon. And I want to share a little bit about their stories before I will go over there and join them. We'll have our conversation. Rich Eisenberg is a self-described unretired freelance writer and editor. Prior to becoming unretired, he was the managing editor of one of my all-time favorite websites, Next Avenue, a PBS site for people age 50 plus. Before joining Next Avenue, Rich was the executive editor of Money, the front page finance editor at Yahoo, and money editor at Good Housekeeping. Throughout his career, Rich has sought to reach the everyday retirement saver so that more people could prepare for a financially stable retirement. Kerry Hannon is a workplace futurist, author, and senior columnist for Yahoo Finance. She has authored more than a dozen books exploring work and jobs, entrepreneurship, personal finance, and retirement. Her latest book, In Control at 50 Plus, How to Succeed in the New World of Work, is available for all of our in-person attendees here at the conference. And I can see that many of you already have your books on your tables. If you don't have a book, they're out there waiting for you. And for our live streamers, after the conference, we'll be sending you an email. If you're interested, we will send you a copy of Kerry's books. And with that, I think it's time to get started. Where do we start? We've been through a pandemic. The workforce is changing. We went from traditional work arrangements to remote work overnight. We just heard from Rick Guzzo. The jury's still out on productivity as it relates to remote workers, even though it looks like remote work might very well be here to stay. So as we sort of set the stage here, Kerry, I'm going to call on you because you've just written a book on the new world of work. Tell us, what is the future? How does it differ from the past? And what do you see as the trends going forward?
Thank you. I am so delighted to be here. And I loved seeing the Mercer numbers because for the most part, that's really great news. And yeah, this is really what has happened as we came out of the pandemic is the workplace has had fundamental changes. And these are changes that yes, many of them had started pre-pandemic, started to bubble up, but they've just exploded going forward. And I'm just going to tick on real quickly, and we can dig deeper as we want to. The first one you just mentioned, remote work. I really do believe that the genie's out of the bottle. It's not going back. Younger workers have wanted this for a long time because they were digital nomads. They understood they could work anywhere. And the fact is, workers, have embraced the idea of remote work as well as employers. It's the business case is there. I think the businesses found that workers were productive, the performance was great, and a lot of we used to have to beg as an experienced worker to get this opportunity to have that flexibility. Today, it's super important, and it's really proven itself to emerge from the pandemic. The second thing is, we talked about this a little in the first discussion, the idea of contract work. Contract work has exploded. I mean, businesses have figured out that this is a really great way to get talent in for short-term projects and what have you. And for older workers, experienced workers, it's a great way to stay on the job. I think it's a wonderful way to extend working lives. And it has some drawbacks, which we can get into depending on your age. But if you're wanting to just continue your work life, the opportunity for employers to reach back and get some of this experienced workers for these contract positions is really, really a wonderful thing that's come out of the pandemic. The third thing is entrepreneurship, self-employment. This is just like lit up. It had started pre-pandemic, but it's certainly here to stay. And again, I love the idea if you have a small business a startup right now that's out there or a nonprofit that you've started, you can actually use those contract workers to help you keep your business costs down and have really talent work for your company. The fourth thing is career transition, right? Career transition is just used to be the outliers. Are you crazy? I mean, do you have enough runway to really make a transition to a new kind of work? But now it's all ages had that time to kind of sit and do that soul searching and say, what is it I want to do right now? What is it that is a priority for me? We all were scared during the pandemic. We didn't know what was going on. And we really did that in our MRI. And I do think career transition and finding ways to get excited about our work again at all ages has just become something that is really deeply embedded now in our working life. And the final thing is lifelong learning. Yes, it's finally here to stay. People are getting it to stay on the job longer. And even at any age, not just older workers, but you've got to constantly be learning new things to stay up to speed with your industry. And the ways to do it, virtual learning has the opportunities to learn virtually just took off during the pandemic, the ability to do this. But there's other really cool things that have emerged as well that employers can do to help reskill, upskill, keep workers on the job. And because everything's changing so quickly, it's non-negotiable now. You absolutely have to have access to education and retraining.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
A short answer.
a big answer to a really big question. And for all of you at Transamerica Institute and our Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies, we do extensive survey work and research. And we recently released a survey of 1,800 employers of for-profit companies, and then we do a worker survey, so we did some comparisons. And one of our survey findings is 84% of employers consider themselves to be age-friendly with work arrangements, training opportunities, and career opportunities so that workers of all ages can be successful. However, when we asked workers the same question, only 61% said their employers are age-friendly. So we are seeing a big disconnect between employers' perceptions and workers' perceptions of employers. And Rich, I'm going to ask you, in this multi-generational workforce and age-friendly employers, through your work and your own personal experience, what have you seen happening among employers, and are we making progress or not?
Well, thank you, Catherine, and it's a joy to be here in person. Last time we were together was in 2019, just when the pandemic was just about to start, so it's nice to be back in person. I would say I'm seeing some progress by some employers, not a lot of progress by other employers. There was another survey that just came out from ARP, we may hear about this later today, that said that of people over 45 who are unemployed, half of them basically said that they either felt they were too old for available jobs or that employers felt they were too old for the available jobs. So I think that tells you something about what's going on when older people are looking for work. But the good news is that, and I wrote about this for a piece I wrote for MarketWatch. I've been writing a column recently called The View from Unretirement. And I wrote a piece about what are employers doing these days with and about older workers who work with them, for them, and ones who want to work for them, and maybe who want to do it part-time in retirement. And what I was pleasantly surprised to find out was that because of the tight labor market we're in right now, more employers are willing to have these conversations with their older workers to say, well, what would you like to be doing? How many days do you want to work? Where do you want to work? They're not all doing this, and they don't always necessarily come to agreement, but they often do find ways to find the way that they can keep their employee who wants to do the work, who, as Rick said, shows that they've got the expertise and the knowledge to help make the company successful, but also allow the worker to work when and how and where they want to do. So I was happy to see that. I'm hoping we'll see more of that.
Can I piggyback on that for one
Please.
second? I think what Rich said is really important to note, that when you talk to workers of all ages, it's not this whole discussion about remote work versus being in the office. It's a hybrid thing. But the point is, the one thing everyone agrees on is flexibility. So if you can offer that to your employees, even at any age, this is a great way to retain workers, and older workers and experienced workers in particularly. I think that's true. And I also think you alluded to the tight job market, which is still here. Hopefully it'll stay here a while longer. But, there are 2 jobs for every unemployed person right now. This is extraordinary. And I really think that experienced workers have a great opportunity, and employers do, to hire them, because you can get somebody who, if they've kept their skills up to date and relevant, they can step into the job and do it right now. You don't have to train them. You don't have to, they can, and I often think I started at Yahoo Finance in January in a full-time position, that a recruiter found me on LinkedIn. I wasn't necessarily looking for a full-time job. And I'm telling you, the reason I got hired was because I could step in and do the job. I mean, I honestly think that's true. I never asked them, but I think so. So I do believe that's the secret sauce for an experienced worker. And I think those two talking points were really great that Rich mentioned there.
Yeah, and I'll even chime in, flexible retirement. And this may be very counterintuitive to employers, but flexible retirement is actually an employee retention strategy. Mm-hmm. Because when work and retirement are an all or nothing proposition, an employer stands to lose valuable talent who wants to transition into retirement, but they feel they have no other choice than to leave altogether. And flexible retirement to allow and enable workers to plan their own retirement, shifting full-time to from full-time to part-time, working in a different capacity, maybe working seasonally. All sorts of really cool arrangements can come from just having that dialogue, not to mention succession planning and training and ensuring that a seamless transition when somebody does fully retire. In our own research, what we see is many employers might do one of those things, but very few employers offer a formal program or the full complement of what they could be doing. So it's a huge opportunity for both attracting and retaining older workers, experienced employees. Now, Rich, unretirement is a growing trend, and we're hearing the word more and more, and you did it. And I remember reading, I saw your email, and then I saw your news stories, I'm retiring, and then a quick minute later, I'm unretiring. And I think it's really would be great for the audience to hear about your journey, your decision process, your experience, your journey.
Well, thank you. So I think what I've been doing is pretty similar to what a lot of other people are doing, but in different ways. So for me, as Catherine said, I had been the managing editor at Next Avenue. I was part of the launch team. I'd been there for 10 years. And last year I turned 65, and I felt like I'd been there a long enough time to now let somebody else have a shot at doing it. And I knew that there were other things I wanted to be doing as much as I enjoyed my job. And so I talked to my employer back late November, and I said, what I'd like to do is leave as of January, but I would love to keep writing for you if you'll let me. But I want to explore some other opportunities. And they were nice enough to allow me to do it and to let me keep freelancing for them, which I'm doing. And it has allowed me to now start writing this column for MarketWatch and to be doing some mentoring and some volunteering. I had a really interesting assignment at NYU this past summer that I never would have been able to do before. And I think there are a lot of other people who are in their 50s and 60s who are saying, I still want to keep doing something, some kind of work. Maybe it's what I was doing before. Maybe it's not. I may be retiring from my full-time job, but I'm not retiring from life. And the funny thing is right now, when I call people to interview them for articles I'm doing, some of them who know me or know of me, often the first question they say to me was, I thought you were retired. And I said to them, well, I am retired, but this is how I'm defining retirement. And I'm still surprised how many people, and people who I think should know better, are having trouble grappling with that definition of retirement these days. And I think we've got a ways to go.
Wow. So you are a role model for us all to follow, the view from unretirement.
But it's really the new model. It's the new business model for the workplace. I mean, that's really what Rich is talking about. I mean, these are fundamental changes that, with longevity that we talked about, with the shrinking, not as many younger people coming up. This is a business solution for the future, not just for right now. And employers really need to understand that this flexibility, this ability to keep people is really going to be the key to performance and productivity.
Yeah, and it's just a huge opportunity. And in our own research, we also see, and it echoes what Rick shared and Mercer's research, is half of workers plan to work beyond 65 or do not plan to retire. And then more than half, well over half, 57%, plan to keep on working in retirement, at least part-time. And it wasn't until recently, in the last few years, we started the question. We added a component of work to retirement dreams. And a third of people dream of doing some sort of paid work in retirement.
Yeah.
And as we delve into the reasons, they're almost as likely, in some cases more likely, to be healthy aging related than financial.
Yeah.
And if we think about this, at this point, this view from Unretirement, we need role models to show how it's done.
Right.
This is a whole new way of looking at this, this point in life for employers as they think about their workforce, and for employees and workers to actually envision and activate the future. Because we don't have that many role models.
Right.
But I think the big question that's still out there is, yes, there are a lot of older workers who want to keep working past the traditional retirement age, but will the employers let them keep doing it? And I'm not sure that a lot of them will. I mean, another statistic I saw in that AARP survey, which was really a great study, was that job seekers over 45 apply for an average of 12 jobs. They get an average of 3 or fewer interviews. There are a lot of older workers or people who want to be working in their 60s or 70s who can't get an interview. It may be because they're not qualified, maybe they don't have the right skills, the temperament, but I think it may also often be because of their age, and the employer says, you're too expensive. As Rick was saying, this person costs more money, there may be a benefits issue. Are they going to want to keep doing this job, or they have one foot out the door already? And so I think I'm hoping that we're going to see more employers willing to have these interviews, have these conversations, to talk with older applicants who are qualified, who do want to do the work, but so far sometimes just can't even get the interview.
But I'd be curious about where those job seekers were, how they were getting to the employer, because it is all about networking. I mean, you can usually get an interview if you have some connection to that business. You have a better shot at it than if you're just applying to an online posting. And I think, it's even more for an older worker, an experienced worker, is who you know at the company or who you know knows that can help you get to that person. And then you have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm really curious. Use those words that indicate that you want to keep learning and you're interested in that business and you care about the mission of that business. I think there's a lot of, I hate to put it back to the individual, but there's a lot of things that an individual can do to help the employer understand why they're valuable. And I think remote work, it can be a great opportunity to retaining workers. As Catherine mentioned, people tend to say they want to work longer, but they often don't because of a health issue, is usually one of the things that stops them from being able to. And if you can work remotely for an employer, if an employer is willing to really retain some remote workers, then in fact, you don't have that commute that causes an issue. That might be the problem, or a workplace that's not ergonomically set up properly. And you can work with more flexibility if you have caregiving responsibilities. Yes, in fact, you can build that in. So for an experienced worker who has a remote opportunity with an employer, it opens the door, it pushes back on ageism, and in many ways solves some of these problems. And it also, you're not being judged a book by its cover. And when you're standing right next to somebody who's a lot younger than you in the workplace, there's a subliminal message there. But when you're working remotely, employers are much more open, and I hope all of you are, to you don't have that. It's not so obvious that there's a physical book by its cover difference.
Absolutely. And going back to a point that Rich was making about older job seekers not getting interviews, there was also a recent study that came out from University of California, Irvine, that was focused on how job descriptions are written. And this study was looking at age 40 and older, so not even age 50 and older. And the language used in the job postings was, and the employers may not have known it, but was biased towards younger workers.
Or maybe they did.
Or maybe they did. And that older workers weren't even applying. And so, of course, I'm always on the lookout for stories, anecdotes. There's and I live in Los Angeles, there's an employer in my neighborhood, fast-growing, footprint, and a tech company. And I went and I looked at their job postings. I'm like, oh, what kind of jobs are they bringing to the neighborhood? And I'm like, oh, I had no idea. I read job postings. I couldn't tell you what the job was about. It had acronyms and things that I knew conceptually that I would know what the job was, but the use of acronyms was just so dense. I didn't know what they were talking about. So, and that's something, a best practice that we talk about with Ames, Colorado, is presenting jobs in a manner that resonates with applicants and workers of all ages, and even the imagery you use on your website. Is there age diversity on the careers page or not?
And sometimes, sometimes you, when you're doing a job posting, you may want to include something in it that tells an older applicant that they don't have reason to be concerned about the job. When I interviewed Brian Caskey for that article I wrote for MarketWatch about what employers are doing with older workers these days, and he told me this great story. He'll tell you more about it if you ask, about a landscaping company that was having trouble finding workers. And I think, if I'm getting this right, Brian, when you talk to them, you explain to them that if they had only included in their job posting that the jobs didn't require heavy lifting and a lot of that kind of work, that you might get some people who would just not be applying for it because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to do the job, but in fact they actually could. And they changed the job posting and they got some applicants. So I think it partly depends on not only how you write it, what you include and what you don't include, and the buzzwords that you include too.
And I also think it's training and talking to the hiring managers themselves about what they're looking for in a candidate, because generations.org did a big survey, global of employment, of hiring practices, and they found that the average hiring manager was around 45. And they tended to hire people who were 45 or younger, but not older than them. And it wasn't that they were they were conscious necessarily of doing that, but we tend to be attracted to people who are around our age or younger and not think of the other people as too old. So it's a training thing that you can do within an organization to have that discussion about the importance of including that in your diversity initiatives, of having age as one of those aspects.
Yeah, and you make a great point, Carrie, and I want to take that a step further. In our multi-generational workforce, and if we think about it, people entering the workforce at 16, and all the way working into their 70s, we have, and some even into their 80s, but we have a good 60-year age span. And as we look back traditionally, the boss-employee relationship, it was an older boss and a younger employee. Well, with our multi-generational workforce, that turns that whole thing upside down. If the average hiring manager is 45, that's a big change. And I'll say I've had a number of managers that are older than I am, and I expect that trend to continue in the future. But how are organizations sort of wrapping their heads around this and cultivating leaders to be able, and workers to, let's get over this age thing, and give managers the ability to manage effectively and confidently, and sort of those, I'll call it worker, little, I don't know, what's the word? I don't know, idiosyncrasies, like, oh, I must be a failure because my manager is younger than I am. Yeah. Those hang-ups is the word I was looking for.
My manager is a couple decades younger than me, and I absolutely love it. I mean, there's so much energy. It's the most exciting thing working for her. She's so smart, and she respects me, and I respect her, and it's all about respect. I think it's really encouraging people to respect each other, and that you can do that. It's really true. And it comes down to communication is another big piece of it. Let's have some training on how we communicate with each other. Because actually, and I'm going to tell my own personal stories, when I started this position, I always tell everyone, older workers who I'm speaking to, I'm giving them advice, we have to, all these different things, stay up to speed with the technology. But here's the thing is, my manager wasn't returning my emails or my phone calls, and I was like really getting upset. And I thought that I had perhaps done something wrong. And I thought, what am I missing here? Turns out she communicates on Slack. I had never even been on Slack before. And so I quickly, got myself up to speed, never said a word about it, and realized that that is how I communicate with her. And we've never, it's never been a problem. But it was as simple as that. I said to myself, I should have had that conversation with her on day one, but I didn't, know. But again, it's,
Yeah. I read a lot of books about work and personal finances and write about them sometimes. And there was one book that I read recently that I really would encourage you to read called Gentelligence. It's by 3 authors. The lead author is a woman named Megan Gerhardt, Gerhardt, who's a professor. And she is a Gen Xer, and her 2 co-authors are people who she's worked with who are Gen Y. And it was all about how multi-generational teams can work together, should work together. And one of the interesting parts of that was about, just as Kerry was saying, was to understand how the other generation likes to work and why, and have them understand how you like to work and why. And sometimes it means you change the way you work if you're an older worker to adapt, and sometimes they do, or sometimes you meet in the middle, or sometimes you just do it differently. But don't basically say it's my way or no way, and don't say, well, they're young and they do it wrong, and that's not the way we've always done it. So I just think more teams need to understand each other a little bit better than they do, and managers can do a better job of helping them understand that.
Perfect. That's so true.
So, a current trend, and Rich, you had brought this up in our preparations, and for me, I'm going to use the word cringeworthy meme, quiet quitting. The TikTok rage, the headlines, all the stories, the reports. But is this something, is this a cross-generational thing? Are experienced employees doing this? What is your take on this whole quiet quitting trend?
Well, I've been looking for data on older workers and quiet quitting. I have not seen it yet. If anybody has found it, please let me know, because I'd love to know. But what I do know is that, and this is part of what you've all seen, Gallup recently did a survey, and they found that more than half of the workforce of all ages feels unengaged in their jobs. Now, I'd love to know how that breaks down by age, and they didn't reveal that. My suspicion is that older workers are less likely to be doing quiet quitting than younger ones. I could be wrong about that, but I suspect that older workers, if they are able to be working, whether it's full-time or part-time, are doing it because they want to, they feel like they're making a difference, they need the income, and nobody loves everything about their job or their bosses, but they've been brought up to give 100%. Not all of them are, but I feel like that's true of that generation overall. Kerry, what do you think?
I honestly don't know any older workers who quiet quit. I think people really are, who, if you're working at these ages, you want to be working. Either you need it for the financial security, or you need it for the mental, physical, social, whatever it is that's propelling you. I honestly feel that way. I'm sure there are examples of people who aren't. There always are people who are just phoning it in, but
or they're burned out, too.
Or they're simply burned out. You're correct.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it exists, but I don't see it as prevalent. But I do think with a younger worker, they have the ability now with the global. They can apply for jobs across the world. They don't need to work for somebody next door. And with remote work opportunities, if the loyalty is even, it was always a little, they like to job jump, it's even more so. You see a better opportunity. Whereas a more experienced older worker, the loyalty is still there. It is still, maybe you're looking at maybe that's not true.
Well, no, I guess what I would say is just a little defense of quiet quitting for a second is that I think in some ways it's about work-life balance for a lot of these workers. And what they're saying is, I'm going to do my best, I'm going to do my job, but I'm not going to do more than my job because I want to have a life and I want to, see my family and do my caregiving and things like that. And that, I think, sometimes it's maligned to call it quiet quitting when they're really talking about doing the job and not doing 2 jobs.
And flexibility. See, that's where that role of how can we redefine the word flexibility to fit into the work. We have this old pattern of what work should be, and it should be these 8 hours, and it should be, you should be available FaceTime anytime, but But we need to shift that around a little bit, loosen up those boundaries so that you get the opportunity that people can work when it works for them as well as for the company.
Indeed. A question for you, Carrie. And it's along the same lines, and that is it's a two-part question because the world of work is changing, and in my mind for the better, is we now, thanks to remote work and flexible work arrangements, have a much more inclusive or potentially inclusive workforce. Stay-home parents who were otherwise unable to balance work and parenting, caregivers, even people transitioning to retirement, much more inclusive. And at the same time, I know you've done a lot of work on this as well, we have people who have been out of the workforce because those opportunities weren't available that could be coming back into the workforce. So a stay-home mom that hasn't worked in 20 years and wants to jump back in. What are you seeing in terms of employer trends as well as among these future re-entrants or returns to the workforce?
I think this notion has been there over time, particularly for women who stepped out of the workplace for child rearing. Now it is caregiving for aging adults, for family members. That is a big piece of this as well. So both men and women have had to step out. I want to see more of this, but there are returnships out there. There are internships out there. There's some iRelaunch. There's some other platforms that are really emerging, have been there, are gaining. There's opportunities. Wave that Rich and I have talked about. And could remind me of what that all stands for.
So it stands for Work at Home Vintage Experts. And these are people who are over 50 who want to be working at home part-time. And it's often in the insurance industry, sometimes it's in accounting. And they are getting hired to do this. And often the way they get interviewed is through blind interviews where the employer doesn't see them. But these people often really like the work, do a great job at it, and the employers love having them. And often they are doing this for years and years on end.
And it's a great balance, and both are vetted on each end. There's a group in Washington, D.C., where I'm from, Flex Professionals, that does the same kind of working with the candidates, working with the employers to make matches. Some of it are contract positions that often evolve into full-time. So, but then there are more formal programs. I mean, some companies have started these kind of to attract even former employees to come back into the ship, come back to us, we value you, how can we get, and offering retraining and reskilling programs. So these are still, it's kind of a work in progress, but anything any of you can do to it, I think there's a really rich opportunity here to really ignite our workplaces, to provide great jobs and so forth. It's a win for everybody.
Yeah, very good. And I also want to give a shout out to Second Act Women.
Oh my gosh,
a startup here in Colorado.
Yes.
Fast-growing organization dedicated to helping women of a certain age either jumpstart, reboot, jump back in.
And great, workshops and seminars. I mean, the website is fantastic. And just they've created a dialogue for women on social media and other places that you help each other out. And I've met some of these women that are just virtually at this point, but has been, the stories are wonderful.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I just like the sort of everyone joining together to make a difference in the workplace and for, individual lives as well.
Well, just one more shout out. When I was at Next Avenue last year, we do an annual influencers and aging list, and I'm proud to say and happy to say that two of our influencers are right here, Geraldine. So
check them out. But one other thing, Catherine, I wanted to mention about education. We talked about reskilling and all this, and I talked about virtual learning as a big trend coming out of the pandemic. There's also the companies, employers I see who, I wrote a story a couple of years ago for the New York Times on this, and it's really stopped a little bit during the pandemic, back again. Employers bringing education to their workplaces via community colleges. So one thing is Cuyahoga. I talked to the folks in Ohio. Cuyahoga County they took an old semi trailer and had it retrofitted with computers and everything, and they drive it right to the lot. And workers who needed to upskill on the technology for manufacturing and so forth. I talked to folks at this one plumbing manufacturer, for example. They didn't have to go to school after work. They didn't have to take time out. The employer gave them time during the day to go out and just zip it up, and they could get right back and actually use those skills on the job right then. Here in Colorado, there's Pueblo Community College, I believe, has these mobile units as well that go out to the employers. It's bringing the education to your workers to help retain them, and it's super duper helpful for an older worker in helping them stay relevant and knowing exactly what skills, because one problem older workers have is you say, they don't have the right skills for the job. Well, what skills do they actually need for that job? And as an employer, you can say, we actually need this. And we can bring the community college to present a program that's going to help our workers.
Yeah. So. And that can help workers of all ages.
Of all ages. It's all ages.
Of all ages.
Yeah.
Well, our time has flown by so quickly. We're 40 minutes in. I'm not sure how that happened. And I think we have time for 2 questions from the audience at the very most. Okay.
One second. Where are you? My name is Mary Vigil, and I work for the National Experienced Workforce Solutions, and we hire 55 plus for government agencies. My question to you is, where do you think that the older generation or that 55 plus generation are looking for positions? Because we're finding that social media may not be the place. What can you advise in that area?
Esther?
I think where I recommend, I think LinkedIn is a good social media platform for work, seeking work for the older workers. But I also think those who really know their industries, want to stay in their industries, are looking to the industry groups to find job postings there, to kind of get a more inside track. I often encourage workers at this age to think about where do they want to work and what companies speak to their mission and the things that matter to them, and then go to those companies' job boards and see what positions are available as a more direct route. But also, when you interview with a company whose mission aligns with your own, there's sort of this beauty of this synergy that can happen in when they can connect. It doesn't happen as often as it should, but that's one way. But I think you're right. I think the job boards, the strict job boards is not the way to go, because there's too many barriers of getting those resumes through where they need to get to. So that's a very good point.
Oh, well, I agree with you from a tactical standpoint. I think the numbers show that older workers or older people who are looking for jobs tend to go to job postings, even though they often have no success finding them. They often talk about a black hole, that they send their resumes and they don't hear anything at all. But I think that's what they've been brought up to think is the first way to look for work. So I feel like there's a disconnect there between them sending their resumes in and then not hearing anything at all. I think many of them are on LinkedIn. I don't think that they are often proactively using it to look for work. They're hoping somebody will find them there, and occasionally that happens. But I don't think they think of it as the place to go seeking jobs, and I don't think they use Facebook or Twitter very much the way younger people do.
But if they did use LinkedIn properly, which I try to tell them to do, you can set up, job alerts that for specifically the kind of work you want and what industry and what kind of hours and so forth. And I think Barbara's got
Yeah, we read your book and we love it. And I'm Barbara with Second Act Women, and that's my work wife, Guadalupe. And one of the things I loved in your book is you said, don't reject yourself. So what would you tell, because we often hear from the women that they have the internal ageism, so they're not going for the positions simply because of imposter syndrome or lack of confidence, and we hear that from recruiters too on the other side that says they can almost sense it. They can sense the lack of confidence, and so that also prohibits the recruiters from perhaps hiring someone. So what would you say to someone in the room, and I know this may not be the target audience because we're all on the other side, but if there is someone who is doubting themselves, what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, there's some really great steps that they can take. One thing I love to tell people to do is why don't you go back and look at some of those old performance reviews that you had, and things that highlight the things that you were really good at, that people told you were great at, and you go, oh, I forgot. Yeah, that is something that I do really well. I'm a big fan of career coaches. I think if you can, even on a moderate basis, it doesn't have to be super expensive, if you can get somebody who doesn't know you, unbiased, can come and look at what you've done, really probe, what do you want to do? What are your interests? Do you remember, what did you love about early jobs that you had? What skills did you have that you totally don't have forgotten because they're so engendered to you? So a career coach can actually help focus somebody on their job, and also to understand, importantly, the financial piece. What do you need to make from this job? That's a big thing, because but in order to believe in yourself, you need to own those skills, remember those talents, have somebody give you that. Your friends and family aren't going to help you out. They're really tired of hearing about it. So, it's like, and I like just, doing some of those exercises to think about, what skills did I have as a caregiver? My gosh, I was a patient advocate. I was a financial manager. I did all this stuff when my time out of the workplace. So remind yourself of what you're really super good at and own it.
And I would just add, on the self-sabotage front, there are surveys, you've probably seen them, that show that when applicants are applying for jobs and they see that they don't have all the skills that are required to apply, that women typically then don't apply, and men typically do apply. And they say, well, I'm going to apply anyway. And guess who gets the job then? Because you can't get a job if you're not applying for it. So, my advice would be to some women, don't not apply just because you don't have everything in that, because often these job postings are looking for unicorns that don't exist. They're saying that we need people who have a laundry list of qualifications that nobody's going to have, but what they're looking for is to try to find somebody with as many of them as possible, and maybe you have them.
Yeah, don't take yourself out of the game. And I do think, I'm going to go back to that word curious. Be curious. You got to tell women to be curious, be engaged. And with men, I was talking to Instant, but everyone's you have to show you want to learn. You really, you want to keep moving forward, not stepping backwards or not staying in place. It's a time of, that employers benefit from that, and so does the worker, because that's how we get people engaged.
Yes. And that's how we realize the potential of a multi-generational workforce. So one final question for each of you, and then we have to call it a wrap. Where can they learn more about your work?
Oh my gosh, that is an easy one. Thank you, Ken. KerryHannon.com, KerryHannon.com. I'm on Twitter at Kerry Hannon, and LinkedIn, and all those good places. Email me, Kerry@KerryHannon.com.
You can read what I write at Market Watch. My column is called The View from Unretirement. I write for Next Avenue very often. You can find me there. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find me there. If you have any trouble, let me know. And my email is richardeisenberg@usa.net, and I'd love to hear from you.
Oh,
Thanks.
I forgot to say, since you mentioned your stuff, Yahoo Finance. If you search Kerry Hannon and Yahoo Finance, you'll get a list of everything I write for them, and it's been a lot.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rich Eisenberg, Kerry Hannon.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience.
Thanks, everyone.